Thank you, everybody, for coming and for staying long enough to be here for the final panel of the day. We appreciate it. We have the honor of standing between you and our reception. We know that, so we will try and keep it engaging enough to keep everybody focused for just a little bit longer. My name is Neil Fromer. I am the Executive Director for Programs for the Resnick Sustainability Institute here at Caltech. The Resnick Institute is the campus research center for sustainable use of natural resources, focus areas in energy, climate, freshwater availability, and ecosystem resilience. This session is focused on opportunities to measure and improve water quality in managed aquifer recharge, or MAR. This offers opportunities to replenish groundwater systems, but faces water quality challenges stemming from agricultural nutrient runoff, as well as biological contamination and pollutants produced by cities, such as heavy metals and PFAS. I think we're probably going to end up spending a lot of time talking about PFAS. Thank you, EPA, for making it even more relevant today than it seemed like it was going to be on Monday. And that's a great opportunity to talk about where we should be dealing with chemical pollutants like forever chemicals. So today our panelists are going to explore challenges and potential solutions for sustainably managing water quality in MAR systems. Our first, we'll have three speakers again here, and I guess I'll follow with the way we've done this earlier. I'll introduce all of them now, and then they'll come up and give their talks. We'll have questions at the end. So the first speaker is Megan Plumlee, the Research Director at Orange County Water District, which is home, as we have heard already a few times today, to the largest indirect potable reuse system in the world. That's still true? That's still true. I'm sorry? For a few more years. And which treated wastewater is used to recharge the local groundwater reservoir. Our second speaker will be Mamadou Diallo, who is currently serving as a rotating program director in environmental engineering at the National Science Foundation. Mamadou is also a research scientist that's worked on membranes for water treatment and resource recovery from wastewater streams. And the final panelist will be Melissa Rohde, principal at Rohde Environmental Consulting, who's working on a number of projects focused on nature-based solutions for MAR. So I think we'll have a good chance to get into a few of the different areas that that people are thinking about when they're thinking about aquifer recharge and some of the water quality issues that are there. And with that, Megan.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to weave together a story about who we are, how we recharge our aquifer, maintain our constructed wetlands, and how we're tackling PFAS. I've never given a talk where I tried to combine all these topics, let alone in 15 minutes, so wish me luck. All right, so kind of at a glance, Orange County Water District. We were formed in the 1930s to basically be the groundwater manager. There was, farmers near the coastline drawing their wells dry or saltwater intrusion, kind of fighting with each other, and so our agency was formed to more sustainably manage the groundwater basin. We're really blessed that we have the soil conditions to do so. It's a very sandy aquifer, so we can store a lot of water. So because we've sustainably managed this resource, groundwater can be almost 100%, 85% of our drinking water supply. The rest is imported water. So we are the wholesaler, so we're kind of in the background managing the water supply, quality and quantity. We serve the water retailers. Those are the cities and water agencies, 19 of them, that pump the water out of the ground and do whatever treatment may be necessary, which is sometimes just adding some chlorine for disinfection and putting it in the distribution systems to people's homes and businesses. So there's 2.5 million people in the area that we serve, which is actually just north and central Orange County, because that's the region, our service area, that overlies the sandy groundwater basin or aquifer that we maintain. So we report up to a 10-member elected board of directors. And another part of our mission is to protect our rights to the Santa Ana River. We're at the end of the line before it goes out to the ocean. And also not on the graphic, because there's only so many cartoonish fun bubbles to squeeze in, but we also manage the constructed wetlands that are along that river system. All right, so we're very pleased that groundwater can be such a large part of our portfolio. Imported water is expensive. I've shown some of the costs there in terms of acre feet. And the cost goes up every year. So does groundwater, so I should have added that, but just not as much as imported water. The map there shows where we are. I can't even barely see it, but yeah, we're the dark blue region. So LA County to the north, San Diego County to the south, even South Orange County, south from us, are less blessed with such aquifers. They do have, well, to the north, LA does also do aquifer recharge, but South Orange County and San Diego has has more dependency on imported water supplies. So the energy to convey imported water is a lot more than stormwater recharge, which is one of our recharge sources. So that gets to why importing water is so much more expensive than groundwater, the energy component. I just wanted to quickly define acre foot of water, since I'll talk about that a few times, and I know we have audience here coming from many different fields. I don't know why the football field is always the graphic that gets used, because I learned that it's not an acre. But anyways, 1 acre foot of water is 1 foot depth of water over an acre. So about a little more than 300,000 gallons of water. So thinking about that acre foot, but per year. So this pie chart shows our recharge portfolio. So I'll talk about this more, but a big part of our mission is to recharge the aquifer, because the rate of natural recharge, which is that sort of light blue piece of the pie, is not enough by itself to keep up with the demand and all the pumping. If we just relied on the natural recharge rates and all the cities continued to pump at the rate they would like to, we'd be drawing in the seawater from underneath and contaminating all of those drinking water production wells with salt. So we have to do active aquifer recharge, intentional or artificial aquifer recharge. And so we have all the other pieces of the pie are the sources we take and recharge into the ground actively. So I'll talk about each of these as kind of chapters in my talk, starting with the stormwater piece. All right, so this is kind of a zoom in a part of our area in North Orange County. You see the Prado Dam. This dam releases water into the Santa Ana River, and that leads to our recharge facilities that I'll talk about. And we have this long-standing collaboration with the Army Corps of Engineers, who operates that dam, to sort of balance their main goal of flood risk management and our goal of water supply. If they simply follow their decades, old control manual, they would be more interested in just kind of releasing the water right away, no matter what the forecast says, even if another storm isn't coming, to just get it out, because then you're prepared for the next storm so that you can store that water behind the dam and reduce the risk of flooding. But we would rather that they release it slowly at a rate that can match our capacity to recharge it into the ground, because that water flows down to this area in the Anaheim area, where we have about 1,000 acres of land that we own for recharge purposes. We actually have about 1,600 acres, and at any given time, about 1,000 of them are wet. And that's how we recharge up to 250,000 acre feet per year. So we divert the water into these pits or man-made ponds and let it sink into the ground. And so, as you can imagine, it's like watching paint dry. I mean, it's just a few feet per day, right? So if they were releasing tons of water all at once, which they do have to do sometimes in big storms, and then we just don't have the capacity to recharge it all because we don't have enough land. So that's why we have to match the capacity based on the land area we have and how quickly water sinks into the ground with their releases. So we'd rather they do it, slower over a longer period of time after the storm events. And so we've had kind of a recent big success we're really excited about. We've been working on forecast-informed reservoir operations, or FIRO, for years now with the Army Corps. And a recent report came out late last year, after many, many years of studies and different stakeholders, that it is viable for Prado Dam. And that's where, instead of just following that control manual the same way and releasing the water quickly right away, a more measured approach. And we're going to be testing a minor deviation, to use their technical terminology, to hold a little more water, for raising the 505 elevation, which is still just a small portion of the capacity of the dam's storage, up to 508. inundating more lands during events, when we have stormwater available, and storing more so they can, and also releasing it more slowly down to our recharge basins. So why is this dam here? Well, as I mentioned, for flood control, Prado Dam was constructed in 1941 to prevent flooding, and there's a couple, incidents that occurred that motivated this. But these events are occasional, except now we've had 2 years of all the rain in a row. So, it is dry most of the year. It's a semi-arid region, as was mentioned in our keynote presentation. So there's our 14 inches per year of average rainfall, which is the same for where we are now in this area. It's not too far away. And so with that semi-arid condition, a large riparian forest has developed behind the dam. So as part of our mission, we manage thousands of acres of habitat, including behind the Prado Dam. That includes the Prado wetlands, but then also along the Santa Ana River and Santiago Creek. So we have biologists and natural resources specialists, and these habitat restoration programs that we're involved in and general management program is part of mitigation efforts that allows for more stormwater capture behind the dam. So it's all interrelated. And some of the success stories include we help bring back an endangered species, the least Bell's vireo, which has some pretty impressive figures showing, counts from the 80s and 90s and how much higher the populations are now. Removing plants that are heavy water users, Arundo, Donax, and replacing it with native vegetation and different insect control programs. So just upstream of the Prado Dam, within that larger riparian habitat is the Prado wetlands. These are constructed wetlands. It's about 350 acres. Our agency constructed these wetlands in the early 90s. I believe that there was something already there, like duck hunting ponds or something. So there was kind of a start that we took over and reconfigured to turn it into a constructed wetland. And the driver, how do we get into this business? We're a groundwater manager, right? That's trying to put water into the ground to keep up with all the pumping and to help prevent that seawater intrusion. So why do we have this wetland system? Well, a driver at that time was that the Santa Ana River was getting more and more dominated by treated wastewater effluent plant releases from upstream communities. And so the nitrogen concentrations creeping up, but we're taking this river water and letting it sink into the ground intentionally, and we don't want to have a negative impact to the groundwater quality, right? And so it was recognized that a well-managed wetland system could help improve the nutrient situation, and it does. So there are lots of, I won't get into the data, but lots of great data on the sort of water quality polishing benefits of this system. And about half of the river base flow goes through it with a residence time of about 8 days. Interestingly, over time, that driver kind of went away because the wastewater treatment plants started doing a much better, more regulations and doing a better job. So that sort of really intense driver went away, but we just kind of keep going along and managing the wetlands. And we're actually talking about, it's time for kind of like a reset. So we're going to think about a new strategic plan about these wetlands. We have gotten a lot of interesting data along the way because researchers want to come in and study the system, and this is an example of a system that we built basically for the research team. It was a Renew It, Reinventing the Nation's Urban Water Infrastructure research team composed of Berkeley and I think Colorado School of Mines, and they both worked on different parts of the project. So we have various data collected by researchers showing the improvements to water quality, such as removing pharmaceuticals in that wastewater effluent-dominated water supply. All right. And so just fitting this all together, I talked about storm flow. So there's the base flow in the river that I'll talk about next, and then these storm events that or the much, where the river has a lot more flow, obviously, and that's where we really need that coordination with the Army Corps. And so when there's not a storm event, we're thinking more about this base flow. And as I mentioned, over the years, it's become dominated by wastewater effluent. It can be like 90% tertiary treated wastewater effluent, especially in the summertime. It's a huge part of our water supply portfolio to have enough water to sink into the ground and keep up with the demand. A little more about our recharge facilities. I mentioned there in the Anaheim area. There's one on the right that is called Anaheim Lake, so a man-made lake. And we divert the Santa Ana River into a number of these ponds, but it's actually not quite enough, so we also do make some purchases of imported water. And over time, we've been able to, through the Metropolitan Water District system, so some of these ponds also get imported water, actually. But over time, we've been able to reduce that that need to purchase imported water as we've increased the size of our recycled water facility, which I'll talk about more later on. On the left-hand side is the river itself, just to acknowledge that itself recharges into the ground in certain stretches that are nice and sandy. And so that's an important facility that we manage as well in order to encourage that infiltration. So I mentioned we have 1,600 acres, about 1,000 wet acres, about 26 of these man-made ponds. 4 of them are Orange County Flood Control Department and the Public Works Department flood control basins that they let us use for infiltration during certain times of year. Lots of pipes and pumps and rubber dams. So we actually have like inflatable rubber dams on the river, and inflating those allows us to slow the water down and divert it into our pump station structures and get it into the recharge facilities, the ponds, and then we can deflate those dams as needed to allow the water to escape by us during when there's concerns about flooding. So it's a lot of investment in infrastructure to kind of make this all work. And here, I just really like this graphic, annual recharge per facility. You can see the river, which is that orange stripe, is super important, recharging a lot of water itself. And then the rest of it is these different ponds that we have. We sort of tuck them in between like FedEx, commercial plants and residential areas and Disneyland or whatever's around. The yellow one that's really tall bar there is actually one of our ponds that recharges the advanced purified recycled water. And so it's so clean with no silts at all that it just zips right down at like 11 feet per day compared to, it's still like watching paint dry, but compared to 3 feet per day for like a river-fed pond that's the silts and turbidity will kind of slow that water down as it gums up the base of the pond and has to be cleaned occasionally. This is just a nice picture of, but also shows how managed the river stretch is. The TNL levees, you constantly see bulldozers out there. We're pushing these things around, keeping them maintained to spread that river water out. We don't want it like going fast, zipping down some channel in the middle. We want it sort of spread out and sinking into the ground. So a lot of management to make this happen and keep up with all the pumping and all the demand of this highly populated region. Sort of a nice cross-section that shows how it all comes together. On the right-hand side of the picture there, you can see Anaheim, where we have the percolation ponds very strategically in that location because it's very nice and sandy where the sand goes all the way up to the surface, so that water can sink down and then make its way down gradient, just flowing downhill to all the different cities, those 19 water retailers that all own and operate these production wells or straws that they've put down into the aquifer to pull that water out. So there's different, for the hydrogeologists in the room, different parts of the aquifer. We have like hundreds and hundreds of monitoring wells to measure water quality and sort of track the interface with the sea, because far to the left of this picture, you can see the ocean. And that's where you can just barely make out, where it says Huntington Beach, you might be able to see where it says injection wells. So that area we have our seawater intrusion barrier. So we're taking advanced purified recycled water and injecting it to create like an underground wall to like a higher pressure zone to kind of hold that seawater intrusion back. And that's been very successful. So we're protecting those closer by cities' production wells like Huntington Beach from seawater intrusion. So we definitely appreciate and recognize that water quality is improved during the recharge process. This is a river water that's influenced by wastewater effluent. The soil aquifer treatment certainly occurs, and it's been studied for decades by researchers and academics. Suspended sediment and the more obvious floating particles are filtered out, but bacteria and viruses are removed. Dissolved organic contaminants are reduced, including anthropogenic organic chemicals like pharmaceuticals, caffeine. So lots of studies and data there. But not everything is removed. Unfortunately, PFAS is present in the Santa Ana River. That, for those that kind of follow the PFAS topic, it's known that it's commonly occurring in wastewater, like sewage treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants. And, they're not the creators of this problem. They're kind of like a pass-through entity since it comes to them in the raw sewage from all the homes and businesses and products that are used that have PFAS. So unfortunately, since those treatment plants were not designed to remove PFAS, it is now present in this river that receives these effluents that we've been taking since the 1930s, and I think 1930s diverting the river into man-made ponds, and then the 1950s PFAS was invented. So this PFAS has been getting into the ground for a long time. Other potential sources are under investigation, but unfortunately, some of the city production wells near the Santa Ana River recharge zones do have concentrations of PFAS that exceed relevant state and federal limits. So it's a big challenge for us and really important since groundwater is the key drinking water source for our region. So we've been in the news lately because of our big effort to build lots of PFAS treatment plants at great expense. $1.8 billion is the estimated expense to our agency, well, to the broader region, I should say, because we're sharing that cost with those water retailers. The total cost over the next 30 years, that's what we estimate. The cost doubled with the new MCL. So we had been estimating $1 billion, which was driven by the February 2020 California response level. That's what it was called. Not an MCL, but the guidance value or recommendation that water above 10 nanograms per liter PFOA is not suitable for drinking and should be removed from service or treated. So initially, our construction of PFAS treatment plants was driven by that, and then more recently, the lower, more stringent 4 nanogram per liter PFOA from the finalized MCLs from just a couple days ago. So we knew this was coming. We knew that number would likely get finalized, and in fact, certain cities just assumed it would and already started building the plants at millions of dollars. So how do we remove the PFAS? So these are the drinking water production wells, right? So I'm just going to jump to a picture, actually. So like these different water retailers have these production wells that they pump the groundwater from our aquifer, and so we don't own and operate those wells, but we decided to 100% fund the capital costs of building these plants on behalf of those water retailers as the groundwater manager and steward of its water quality and quantity. So here's an example. Water agency where they built it like recessed down so that neighbors wouldn't have horrible views in their backyards of these big, tanks. Because these are like small footprint areas, the zone right around a well where you never expected to need space for more facilities. Thought you just needed space for the well. But we're able to squeeze in ion exchange plants. We chose that over GAC in large part because ion exchange is a smaller footprint to treat the same amount of water, and we were space constrained. So $1 billion cost, but now that needs to be updated to $1.8 billion on this slide. 61 wells out of the 200 wells in North and Central Orange County were taken out of service because of the PFAS. So a huge impact to the drinking water supply. That's 85% of our drinking water supply in this region. We're building 39 treatment plants because some of those wells are grouped together. Very expensive. We're paying for all of the construction costs, and then we're sharing going forward the O&M costs 50-50. I do want to clarify that PFAS is not a concern for our recycled water. Orange County Water District is very well known for our groundwater replenishment system. That's the name for our advanced water purification facility that takes treated wastewater effluent from our partner, the Orange County Sanitation District, and advanced purifies it to drinking water quality as one of those sources that we sink into the ground. But since the advanced purification easily removes PFAS, it's not a concern. And so I think there's been a little confusion where we're in the media for all of the PFAS plants we're building and the PFAS problem in Orange County, but then we're also well known for this recycled water plant. And I have had folks say, oh, so it turns out all that water recycling you were doing to advance purify the water, and put it in the ground, now you've created this huge problem. And that's not the correct situation. The advanced purified water has no detectable PFAS and is really enhancing the water quality of the groundwater where it's being injected and recharged. So as I mentioned, this is a really important piece of the pie as far as our sources of water for recharge. So I know I'm out of time, so I won't elaborate much further. This is a nice bubbly schematic of the advanced purification system. And with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions, maybe. At the end, right? Okay.
Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to participate in this panel and make some opening remarks. So I am Mamadou Diallo. I'm currently a program director, environmental engineering in the CBET. CBET is Chemical, Bioengineering, Environmental, and Transport System, but I'm spending 75% of my time working with another NSF program called the Regional Innovation Engine. Before I start saying anything, I'm going to do the disclaimer. The opinion expressed in this presentation are mine, and they are not necessarily those of the National Science Foundation. Okay, so I've said that. Now, so let's kind of, so first I'm going to give you some introduction about PFAS with a focus on PFAS as functional material of high concern. Then I'm going to switch to PFAS as drinking water pollutant. And then from there, I'm going to look at PFAS pollution and manage aquifer recharge, impact on water quality, as well as the implications of PFAS pollution on water quality management. And since this is has a focus on measurement, so I'm going to leave you with some measurement challenges need to think about. So at NSF, so I do research on developing new membranes that can ion exchange high throughput flow that selectively bind oxyanions. So I'm not going to talk about my research. So what I'm going to talk about PFAS is really based on my experience as NSF program director, where I'm managing a funding opportunity called Erase PFAS that fund the research focused on advancing engineering research to develop remediation solution. And I also represent NSF on the OSTP-led PFAS strategy team. So we've been tasked by Congress through the NDA, National Defense Authorization Act 2021 to look at PFAS research in the federal government. First, summarize the state of the science. We already published a report. And then we're working on PFAS strategy for the federal government, identifying federal R&D priority. And then I'm often asked to prepare and deliver briefing to congressional committee. By the way, PFAS is a bipartisan issue. Don't worry about it. There is a bipartisan congressional caucus on PFAS, okay? So then, some often I get these requests. It propagates the way that NSF work. You get a request from top down, it propagates to the program director subject matter. So I'm involved in a lot of these things. So the first thing that I'm going to spend some time to tell you about PFAS. So essentially, what are PFAS? PFAS are the synthetic organofluorine that have been manufactured since the 1940s. So all PFAS, they essentially have a carbon chain bonded to fluorine atom. So what makes them so unique is first, the strength of the carbon-fluorine bond. It is the strongest in organic chemistry. Second, fluorine is very small and has a strong dipole moment. So it provides additional shielding to these carbon-carbon bonds. So those carbon-carbon bonds are shielded. And in water, you have an additional dipole interaction that makes that bond very difficult to break. Because of that, you have these unique properties, like PFAS are much less flammable, they are resistant to degradation, oxygen, all of these things. So those unique properties of PFAS had made them really very attractive functional material for a lot of applications. So what I'm showing you here is essentially three classes of PFAS. Fluorosurfactant, and this is an example of a fluorosurfactant. It has an alkyl chain with CF bond and carboxylic group. So I'm going to come back to that type of PFAS. So if you look at it, PFAS are very prevalent. So we're not going to stop using them tomorrow. So the key is to managing them. There are specific applications like clean energy, semiconductor manufacturing. PFAS is so critical there. the federal government is not going to ban the use of PFAS given all these investment that we're doing in semiconductor manufacturing. So we really have to learn how to contain them. So the same properties that made PFAS so really valuable as functional material are actually also causing them to have some concerns. So what I'm showing you here is essentially what I call the two poster molecule of PFAS as forever chemicals that have demonstrated their persistent bioaccumulative mobility and hazardous in the environment. These two are perfluorooctanoic acid, known as PFOA. So for the rest of the presentation, you're going to hear me talk about PFOA. And then perfluorooctanoic sulfonic acid, known as PFOS. So these compounds, they were actually banned, phased out in 2002 and 2015. However, we still have some of the product PFAS in important product. So after the phase out of those, what the industry did is they moved to quote unquote short chain PFAS. And those are, we thought they were safe, but they are starting to get problems. So I can discuss that offline. So what do we actually know about the health impact? So this is a table that our PFAS strategy team put together to summarize what exactly do we know about the health impact of PFAS and where is the consensus. So what you see here is a category, health, and then the outcome. So then you see the different agencies that have looked at the data. X means like these agencies have said, okay, there is enough evidence for them to really agree that there is a health concern with that specific outcome. And then what you see in parentheses is the PFAS, PFOA, and PFOS. All these, interestingly, all these PFAS that EPA is proposing to regulate, there is enough of a consensus among all of these to say that this has a health impact. So the next question is, what happened to PFAS in the environment? PFAS in the environment, once you start having the contamination, it actually distributes into the different environmental media. So I heard about biosolid. Biosolid is a major problem. Like in Maine, they are banning the use of biosolid as amendment to soil agriculture because they've been accumulating a lot of PFAS, and then that PFAS is finding itself into the food. But my focus is going to be on PFAS actually drinking water treatment, because drinking water is probably one of the most important route of exposure for PFAS accumulation. So then drinking, essentially, in the next slide, I'm going to share the data, the study that USGS has done. It's a 5-year study looking at sampling public water supply as well as private wells. So, and then they really made sure that these data were validated by 3 labs. So that if you look at essentially, the first thing that really comes really in mind is like, based on these results, at least one PFAS could be detected in 45% of US drinking water supply. So then if you go further, they look at and say, for approximately 15% of the sample they analyze, you have over at least 17 PFAS with 4 of these regulated PFAS. And look at the concentration. Most of these concentration up total, they are above the current drinking water limit, which is next slide. So these are essentially the regulations. What EPA has proposed is 2 types of regulation. The first regulation is what's called maximum contaminant level. So these are enforceable for 2 PFOA and PFOS. In addition to that, EPA is proposing something called hazard index. Hazard index is essentially something that EPA use in Superfund to regulate mixture. So the hazard index for those 4 short chain PFAS is, this is how you calculate it, and you want to be essentially 1. So in addition to that now, EPA is saying that we want to essentially make sure that there is no PFAS really in water. So then they are proposing these health-based, non-enforceable, called maximum contaminant level. So now these are the regulations. Now, what's the impact on MAR? So So I went and looked at some of the data that's available. So as an example case study, Tucson, Arizona, they use groundwater to recharge, recycled water to recharge their groundwater. They use up to 10%. So they conducted a study in 2018 to look at contamination of PFAS from their production well. So the results were really sobering. So what they found was like there is all these, in this picture on the right side, what you see, all these are PFAS that were detected in the production well, okay? Why? Because you don't have that problem in Orange County. Your recharge water does not have PFAS, but their recharge water had a lot of PFAS, and that recharge water now has penetrated the aquifer. So they actually stopped that. So how you're going to deal with that is going to be interesting. So also what you see here is different PFAS based on their chain length. The shorter chain PFAS, they are more mobile, whereas the long chain PFAS, they accumulate into the various zone, but later they can be mobilized and then released. So what's the implication for this? So right now, if you want to do MAR and you want to deal with PFAS, you have two options. You have to protect the source water, and you don't have that. Orange County, your recycled source water does not have PFAS, but other municipalities that might have PFAS in their source water, they have to treat it before they can recharge it. It also depends on the dilution, right? It used to be like you can solve a pollution problem by diluting. I'm not sure where you can get away with it with PFAS. The second thing is you're going to have probably to do post-treatment. And this is where my own research, I'm interested in selective removal of PFAS using ion exchange membrane. I will talk to people on that later. So now, where are we? So since this is, one of the team here was to think about nature-based solution for PFAS removal. Yes, so nature-based solution, essentially, when you think about nature-based solution, the first thing that comes into mind is biodegradation. And this is where we have a problem. Fluorinated compound, most of them are unnatural. So if you look at the environment, we don't have many bacteria that have evolved the right machinery to actually do defluorination. First, they need to have specific enzyme defluorinize, but even if they do have that, fluoride is highly toxic. That's really a major issue right now for biodegradation. If you start degrading, fluoride accumulate, it can kill the bacteria unless these bacteria evolve system to pump out the fluoride and sensing them, things like that. There is hope around the corner. So a group at Princeton, Peter Jaffe's group, isolated an iron-reducing bacteria that essentially uses ammonia as electron acceptor and ferrihydrate to carry out some reaction. When Peter Jaffe started this work, they did not think about PFAS. But then they characterized that strain, I call it A6. They find the strain had some interesting reductive dehalogenase, including a previously reported dehalogenase. So they're like, well, let's test whether they can actually defluorinate PFAS. So they run an experiment at high concentration, and it turns out they do. They observe the release of fluoride as well as the degradation of the PFOA into the smaller chain surfactant. So there is some hope to do this, but these bacteria, very slow growing, need all of that. We can talk more about that later. So when you think of nature-based solution, you think of constructed wetland. So since there seem to be iron-reducing bacteria seem to have evolved some type of enzyme machinery to at least start some degradation of PFAS. And I did not show enough data here, but there's a lot of work showing PFAS uptake by plant accumulation. So maybe there is hope to actually discover new bacteria, plant strain together that can help provide some natural, PFAS treatment system. But to do that, there's a lot of fundamental work measurement challenges that looking at these in the field and try to identify what genes are expressed, metagenomics, advanced and enzyme assay. But when you deal with PFAS, you have to develop things called non-targeted analysis. You have to be able to look at everything, the degradation product. And right now we have very limited technique. They are best called on targeted analysis because you need the reference standard. And then in this morning, I was saying that if somebody remote sense can detect inorganic and organic fluorine, that will be amazing, because one way to really look at broad PFAS is really look at the fluorine. How is it distributed? Organic, inorganic. So anyway, these are the things that I wanted to share with you, and look forward to the panel discussion and question. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've had a really great time today. I hope you all have as well. It's been extremely interesting, and I love the range of topics that we've been having on this important issue. My name is Melissa Rohde. I'm principal of Rohde Environmental Consulting, and I work a lot with government agencies and NGOs to incorporate ecosystem water needs assessments into water management planning and in MAR applications. So we're living in a time with a lot of big concurrent challenges. Earlier we heard about political challenges, but in relation to water specifically and ecosystems, which is a lot of the focus of my work, we're living in a time of a lot of species decline. We have 1 million species worldwide that are subject to extinction or at risk of extinction, and including in California as well. California, if you didn't know, is a biological hotspot globally with more species than the rest of Canada and the US combined. So whatever we do here has an outsized effect globally. In addition to that, we're faced with intensification of drought and flood events, groundwater depletion, seawater intrusion, and then also a lack of access to safe and affordable drinking water. In California, 1 million people lack access to that. So managed aquifer recharge is a very popular solution proposed, especially here in California. It's a great water management tool that can achieve water supply benefits, but also other co-benefits. We have a lot of groundwater aquifer storage space in California, way more than we do in our surface water storage. And with the passing of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, this law essentially adds another safeguard from a regulatory perspective to help protect that water for the intended end use that various local agencies would like, and to also achieve multiple objectives. So back in 2016, I published a study with my colleague Deb Perrone, and we analyzed the benefits and economic costs of MAR projects. And what we found is that a lot of projects in the proposals had basically quantified various co-benefits associated with their water supply projects. The challenge that we found is that a lot of MAR projects don't actually live up to the expectations that they had originally proposed. And one of the reasons for that is just a lack of water supply to actually see that those estimated storage capacity increases happen. And the projects that had access to a diversified portfolio of water, like treated wastewater or flood water, were more resilient and able to live up to those proposed numbers. We also found that the costs of managed aquifer recharge projects are much more affordable than the other types of water supply projects that we have access to. Managed aquifer recharge that is dependent on designated recharge facilities like in Orange County are more expensive than more nimble flood of managed aquifer recharge projects that are happening on agricultural lands or And I'll give an example. Because they basically are leveraging existing private water rights holders and the land that they have access to carry out those projects rather than managing and operating canals and recharge facilities. So that's kind of an interesting way to also achieve multiple benefits and keep costs low. One great example of this has been kind of championed by the University of California. It's a concept called RENM. It's recharge net metering, and it borrows from the solar rooftop from the energy sector, where basically ratepayers for water pumpers get a credit if they replenish groundwater on their farms. And that way there's a win-win scenario. So I'm going to provide some examples of managed aquifer recharge projects that I've seen that are integrating ecosystem benefits. I have to say that they're more of the exception than the rule, and there's a lot of opportunity to expand upon these types of managed aquifer recharge projects. So before venturing out in my own consulting firm, I worked with the Nature Conservancy, and one of the big things that they worked on in the water program was this program called Bird Returns, which basically pays farmers to replenish pays farmers to flood their fields few inches to create pop-up wetland habitat for migratory birds flying along the Pacific Flyway. So it's kind of like the Airbnb for migratory birds who are really hungry and need a rest on their flight north or south. And this project is still really important because basically the percentage of wetland and riparian habitat that we have remaining today is 5% of what was historically the extent. And so we're really left with like small, marginal, naturally remaining, highly fragmented ecosystems. And by expanding this habitat on agricultural and working lands, we can increase habitat for these species. And let's see here. And this has the potential, we have the potential to kind of replicate this type of concept in many different places. Groundwater declines and agricultural croplands often coincide with each other, and there's a lot of other flyways, migratory flyways worldwide where we could, this kind of thing could be replicated to achieve multiple benefits. Another example is a multi-benefit recharge project along the Kern River Valley. This is just upstream of Lake Isabella, and there's a preserve there that's owned by Audubon, and they work in partnership with Ducks Unlimited and other agencies to actively recharge on the floodplain. And I've done some research with some from Landsat imagery looking at drought impacts on riparian forests across California, and what I found was that this particular site was able to recover from drought. There was some mortality during the drought because groundwater levels declined quite a bit, but then they were able to recover quickly because of these types of recharge activities. And that's really important because if you don't have recovery after drought, then you can end up having a system that's natural transition towards an unnatural state, or even with one that's laden with non-native species that end up consuming a lot of water and being a nuisance. And so it's really important that we're, replenishing groundwater not only for shallow groundwater users, but also for ecosystems which tend to be quite vulnerable to drought. The third example that I'm going to tell you about is a wastewater treatment facility. This is Victor Valley Wastewater Reclamation Authority. And in this site, they essentially are discharging their wastewater effluent into these ponds, and it's made the groundwater levels very shallow in this area. And similar to like in Prado, near Prado Dam, when there's water, the riparian forest will grow. And what was really interesting here is that essentially, because there's the toilets are flushing despite the water year type, this site was basically was a drought refugia for native species. And so there's, there's a lot of discussion in the state about recycling water, and a lot of, especially in Southern California, there's a lot of folks that want to divert that water, treat it higher, put it in a purple pipe, and use it for other purposes. But there's a trade-off that's not really discussed, and that's the loss of these created habitats that maybe they were there a long time ago, they were lost, they were recreated, but because there's such a small percentage of these ecosystems, if we need to consider the impact that this is happening, because that's happening if you recycle the water, because these are essentially biological hotspots with threatened and endangered species that are protected under state and federal laws. So what are the opportunities? So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which I mentioned earlier, was passed. In this law, local groundwater sustainability agencies are required to establish sustainable management criteria in their groundwater sustainability plans. And there are 6 undesirable results, which are also called sustainability indicators, where water quality is one of them. And I was part of an effort to a consortium of NGOs that reviewed all the plans that were submitted to the state. And the water quality sustainability indicator, because there's so many other policies that overlap, I think there was a missed opportunity for specifying concrete thresholds to ensure that groundwater quality is met. And also with this law is that you have to set these sustainability targets to bring the basins into hydrologic balance, but you also have to prevent these unintended consequences. But there's project and management actions that these local agencies need to implement in order to achieve that by 2040. And so if you have thresholds, quantitative water quality thresholds, then the agencies can develop project and management actions like MAR or demand management strategies or non-point solution strategies to meet those objectives. And so I think SIGMA, as it's known, is a very, not a lot of folks that are in this space are aware of it, and I just wanted to make sure that you all are aware of it, because it's an amazing law. It has a lot of potential to really bring us to a sustainable future. We just gotta have those numbers and thresholds and make sure it happens. All right, and then the challenges. There's quite a few of them. So a lot of folks like to rely on managed aquifer recharge, and it's a great strategy, but it's not going to solve all of our problems. We need to also do demand management strategies. And here's some images from a couple papers, one by Nicola, who's here in the audience today, where they found that MAR has the potential to recover 9 to 22% of the existing groundwater overdraft over the entire Central Valley. And so really our water supply is limited, and we have this historic legacy of groundwater depletion, and so we need to really think broader about what other options that we have, thinking about how we're utilizing our land use across the landscape. And so I just want to put that out there, because it has potential. There's a lot more that we can do, but it's also not the end-all be-all for securing our water future. Another challenge is that because water quality from a management perspective, there's so many different regulations, there's so many different constituents, we don't even have a handle on water quantity. And a lot of times you need to even understand water quantity before you can understand the fate and transport of water quality. We're lacking measurements of groundwater wells, stream gauges, and from the ecosystem perspective, the science is lagging even more. we are, subjecting a lot of these habitats to water that we don't really understand what the effect is. And some examples are like selenium and endocrine disruptors and pharmaceutical drugs. And so there needs to be more research on, there's a ecosystems have the potential to purify, but there's also, I don't think there's enough known to really understand what are the potential trade-offs or the harm in that process. And so that's something we should be aware of, especially given that a lot of critically endangered species exist in these places. Having ecological thresholds for water quality is really needed. And I just published a paper in Nature Water looking at water quantity thresholds, but there's a whole, getting to the water quality thresholds for these ecosystems is really needed and hasn't really even been done globally. I think the EU has made more progress on this because they require those thresholds, but there's a lot of research space in that. And I just wanted to bring up the kind of the reality in the water management sector is that you can, in research, there's a lot of really great advances in science, and you can really hone in on the scientific accuracy. But in the field and at scale, when you're managing large regions, at some point there's a trade-off in terms of what you can actually do to monitor and mitigate, and for me as a scientist, I've had to kind of come to grips with this, in my work is okay, we have to be okay with some uncertainty to make sure that we're moving forward and that we're moving in the right direction and that we're at least we're taking a step forward, kind of like an adaptive management framework, right? And so I just want to put that out there because a lot of really great research happens where you put together really great projects, solutions, and then you hand them off to an agency and they're like, what am I supposed to do with this? This is too costly, can't do it. And so I think having a good working relationship with local agencies or nonprofits who are on the ground right at the beginning of the research project is really helpful because then you can design it together and be aware of what their limitations are from a practicality standpoint. And that's all. I think we're moving on. Thank you.
Okay, great. We'll have the panelists come up, and we've got time for some questions. So, over there. Anybody know anything about Tulare Lake?
Where'd it go? Is it in an aquifer now?
No, it's not.
Okay. Hold on. Let me bring the microphone up. We'll make sure that everybody can. Also, I need my exercise for the day.
Thank you. We work with Westwater Research. We're a water market expert economists, and we were looking at groundwater recharge project last year, especially when there was a lot of flood flow water available to a lot of water district, and we found that they were mildly successful until there was economic incentive provided to landholders, such as recharge credit or possibly money paid to landholders. Did you, in your experience, see similar themes?
Do you want to talk about it? I can talk about it. So the only way that you can have market incentives like that is if there's regulations. So once there's regulations, then it kind of creates the security and the framework for, being able to allow for that. And so the Renim project that I was telling you about is being implemented in Pajaro, which is on the Central Coast. And they've piloted it out, and their folks have basically are receiving credits to offset the pumping costs. The issue is that a lot of places don't have meters on their wells. They don't have, they're not paying by volume. And so that's why Sigma kind of creates this new environment where that kind of thing can happen now. So you first need that, that regulatory push, and then you get kind of the creative solutions and the economic incentives to do with it. Because basically before Sigma, groundwater was just undervalued and free.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I think for Orange County, the driver was, necessity is the mother of invention. So we were a growing population, started more farmers at first and then replaced ag with the growing population. And so we had to do groundwater recharge very actively to keep up with demand. Otherwise, all of the production wells would have gone saline and had to be destroyed and moved inland, right? So we needed to protect this really precious freshwater resource. So then when Sigma came out, not to, oversimplify, but we basically just wrote we wrote a report of the things we're already doing and handed it in, and we were in compliance. But it was a much bigger lift for other regions around the state that needed to form, cross-agency collaborations and figure out how they're going to more sustainably manage their groundwater systems. But we were already doing it because we had to.
Well, you were a special management act.
Yeah, we were formed in the 1930s as we're called a special district because we were formed through an act of the legislature to address this local issue that was happening with the overpumping near the coast.
This is for Megan. Megan, I saw that you need $1.3 billion for these plants for PFAS at this point in time. There are also communities that are looking at, frankly, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars for stormwater capture and treatment. Where are you getting all the funding?
1.8 billion.
1.8.
Yeah. So the way we have funding to be in the business of being a water agency, I think is pretty interesting. On an annual basis, we estimate, what our costs will be to operate for the next year. Well, we have longer term, but in terms of immediate annual budget setting, we have all of our facilities to maintain, our large recycled water treatment plant, the various groundwater recharge basins, all the wells, our huge laboratory with lots of LCM SMSs running all of the time. And so the expense of running, of managing this groundwater system is basically passed to the ultimate consumer, right? So we are the wholesale water agency. We maintain the supply. The different cities and water agencies that pump the groundwater, they pay a fee to us per volume pumped, and we also have the authority to limit how much they pump. So we set the amount of pumping and the price for it. And we raise the price a bit every year because costs always go up. Our costs continue to go up. And so those water retailers then have their own costs, the pumping, the treatment at the wellhead, and the distribution. And so ultimately, it's the ratepayers, the households and businesses that pay for all of this service through their water bills. And that means that $1.8 billion PFAS impact will ultimately be borne through the price of water in the region. But we're able to carefully spread that out over time so that the hurt isn't felt all at once.
So this question goes directly to the contrast between your urban district, which is, as marginal cost is $1,200 an acre foot, and then the Central Valley, where the marginal cost of an acre foot is whatever it costs to pump a well, to sink a well, and then get the water at the cost of pumping. And so what I was wondering is, how much of what we've learned from Orange County is actually meaningful? It's clearly meaningful for Los Angeles and all the urban areas because at some level we have the same willingness to pay. But the big environmental issue is the one that was addressed on the ag side. And then when you said demand management, what I read this is, well, we really have to take 30% of the Central Valley out of production. And that goes back to Bruce's problem about a political issue. So can you two say something about what you think about the ag-urban interplay in California water and groundwater management? Because Orange County is essentially almost pure urban now. And the Central Valley is almost pure ag. And the question is, where do these two things meet in this space of groundwater management?
I think it's more a good question for you, but yeah, I would say because we're more urban driven and recognizing that imported water and natural rainfall in the river system weren't going to be enough to keep up with the demand for pumping. That's how we were able to justify the expense of the advanced purification system to do potable reuse. It is expensive, right? To take treated effluent and advanced purify it to drinking water standards for potable reuse. But ultimately, all the costs get melded together in that pie that I showed. And so when you have when it's raining, I'm happy because it's the free water, right? And lately it seems to be happening on Fridays through the weekend. So then I feel bad for our staff up at the Forebay in Anaheim because they're running around like crazy. But that's, almost free water compared to the more expensive advanced purified water and the other sources. So it melds together and is ultimately still, but even the recycled water itself, just that cost alone is still more affordable than imported water. So I don't know if that's maybe a roundabout way of just saying different drivers in different communities, and it's such a local issue, whether the cost is something you can bear for the solution at hand.
Okay, so let me just say, as an economist, I would like the price of water to be the same everywhere in the state, short of transport costs. And we're very, very far from that, and that causes all sorts of problems.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, my understanding is just in Orange County alone, the price of water is much less expensive in North Orange County because we have this vast groundwater supply compared to South Orange County that's more dependent on imported water. So it is very uneven.
If I learned one thing during the keynote, it was that the whole point is that politics is going to explain the inefficiencies of your market. Go ahead.
Yeah, speaking, Mr. Inefficiency here. First of all, Mamadou, I really appreciated the very clear presentation you made on PFAS, and as a non-chemist, I thought I followed most of it. Don't give me a test, though. But here's the question I have for you. Okay, if I understand the Biden order, it is to stop the use of the PFAS, right? But there's already been deployed, and people have ingested, and it's in these various systems. So as a policymaker, I'd want to know what the Sankey diagram would be of where where these PFAS or whatever you call them went. In other words, where are individuals ingesting the most of this, and through what means? Is it through the milk cartons? Is it through the plastic bottles? I don't know. Is it in the water supply? To what extent do you focus on the water supply versus other things? Because we've got a problem out there, right? Okay, yes, we'll stop the use of it, but what do we do about what's out there, and how do we know what the most effective policy strategy is given the pervasiveness of these things?
Wow, this is a tough one, and we essentially, our PFAS strategy team, we're looking at these, right? So just maybe to dissect it. First, in terms of exposure right now, so there is the occupational safety exposure, especially firefighters that are having these PFAS-coded firefighting gears, right? So they get a lot of exposure, and also the major initial problem of PFAS contamination was coming from these aqueous forming film that we've been using to fight fighters. So to fight fires. So why it became a problem, but DOD was responsible for a lot of that. They did not really look at it until this became a major problem. So then, based on those, then a lot of the exposure of PFAS got through the water. And then in the water, ingestion, drinking, and also, in the water column, you get this biomagnification, the fish sinks, so it starts propagating above the trophic level. So right now, it's so complex that you gotta start from somewhere, and it seems like drinking water is the right starting point. Now, as far as the federal government looking at PFAS, there is a broad look into essentially looking at PFAS as what are the critical essential use, and then what are the application where you can start phasing them out, like food packaging, orders, but there are some applications. So right now I'm focused on PFAS and semiconductor manufacturing. There's no way with all these investment that we're doing, you're going to phase out PFAS. If you phase out PFAS right now in semiconductor manufacturing, forget all these billions of dollars we investing. It's not going to happen overnight. So what's the strategy is to develop better way of containing PFAS, abating it, and then phasing out, these non-essential use kind of. So it will take some time. But our best strategy right now might be mitigation, abatement, and replacement for non-essential critical use. So hopefully I answer your question.
That's very well, thank you. Okay, you're welcome. I'm going to ask one quick question after this last one, and then we'll be done. So, thank you.
Melissa, you said something about we lack the data for water quality thresholds in riparian habitats. So I'd like to ask Megan, if you manage all the wetlands or a lot of wetlands in Orange County, do you do any measurements about the water quality, and how does that inform your decisions about the management?
Right. Yeah, so we have a huge water quality monitoring program across kind of that different aspects of our mission, but more emphasis on the groundwater, since we're the groundwater manager, and on that large recycled water plant. But we do a lot of sampling in the wetlands as well. I think a lot of it's purely voluntary, just because it's, we're a steward of those wetlands. And so a lot of that data I showed, I just showed some pharmaceutical data. That's really from outside researchers, where we open our doors, and if outside, academics are interested in doing a study, UC Riverside just did one with some pesticides. So we have data driven by outside research groups that continue to demonstrate occurrence and fate, and some, usually at least partial removal of different constituents through the wetlands. But no, I don't think it's really as much regulatory driven, more just voluntary and research studies.
Okay, great. As a last question, since this is really about measurement, and we spent a lot of time learning about these systems and some of the challenges in them, and this was just a little bit about measurement. If each of you could just pick one thing that you wish we had measurements on that we don't have, what would you pick?
PFAS non-targeted analysis and total fluorine measurement. So there are so many of them out there, you cannot selectively just develop what's called one measurement at the time. So that's the challenge.
So global fluorine
Yes.
content.
If you can map fluorine, not only fluorine itself, but the fluorine, different species, whether it's an inorganic fluorine or different organic, maybe you can figure out a way whether that fluorine is linked to an enzyme. And I'm just thinking out loud. Maybe I'm just dreaming. But if you can do that, if somebody has that proposal, I'll fund them.
Yeah, I guess one of the thoughts that this event brought to my mind today is I feel like a lot of the discussions around water quality and the needs for measurement and sensing in our space is we go right to demonstrating that the water is safe for people or safe for the environment. So looking at levels of things known to be toxic like PFAS or nitrate. But all of the work that my group is doing on water quality is a totally different driver, actually. And so it's really, how do you improve the efficiency and performance of a water treatment plant because of water quality related things you're measuring? So I'll just give one example, because I feel like without an example, it's just too vague. We have a project with a startup company that has an online real-time nanoparticle sensor that can give you the count and the size distributions of all the different particles. And that's like bacteria sized, or, small colloidal size is nanoparticles, so small particles. So, but couldn't be in the size range of certain microorganisms as well. And we have a study to look at for the ultrafiltration membranes that come before RO, which are so important to remove bacteria and particles. Right now, we just backwash them on a schedule. But what if you did smart backwashing, where you only backwashed it during the times when the particle load is high? Because there's been other data to show that certain size particles clog the pores. So what if you backwashed less often when you really needed it? That would mean less energy. This is very energy intensive water to make this highly purified water. So what if you could somehow just run your plants smarter, more efficiently, use less chemicals, and use less energy as a result of having better water quality data. So I feel like we need workshops between the developers of sensors and instruments with the actual operators of treatment plants and managers to understand where those needs are. So I don't have a particular constituent in mind, but just nanoparticles was one example.
I also don't have a specific constituent in mind, but the thing that I think that needs, from a measurement perspective, that needs to be honed in on are indicator constituents or scalable methods that can be implemented from a agency or an entity that's working on the ground. And so trying to figure out like how we can take what we know in the science and then be able to use proxies to approximate that and to inform policy decisions and to have management move forward. If that made sense.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. Let's thank all the speakers again. And really, thanks to all of you, everybody who spoke today, everybody who sat and asked thoughtful questions and got this conversation started. We have a reception now in the Dabney Gardens, as long as it's not raining outside, which is right across San Pasqual Walk. So if you go down out the doors to Ramo and Baxter and just sort of across the way, those folks who are here from Caltech will help make sure everybody gets over there. And then the speakers have a dinner tonight, and we start again tomorrow at 9 o'clock again, let's say, at 9 o'clock again with breakfast. Okay, great. So thank you, everybody, again for being here.